Welcome, everyone, to the Services Ops Podcast. We're very excited to have you here for our very first episode. My name is Chris, who's the head of marketing at Provus, and I'm here with our CEO and co-founder, Mahesh Bakshi. Mahesh, welcome to Services Ops Podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much. Super exciting to do this podcast.
Yeah, me too. And this is one that I think is a long time coming for a pretty underrepresented audience. And when we think about services ops and when we think about what this podcast to be, we're speaking to a pretty specific group of people. And I think they're going to be really excited for the content that we have coming out. What do you think?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Very good. All right. So let's get in really quick to what this podcast is and who this is for. All right. So first, something we all know, services is a complex business model, and by its nature has an incredible amount of variables that impact an organization's ability to not just drive revenue, but to deliver optimal margin outcomes. These outcomes don't just happen, right? There are groups of departments and professionals within a services organization responsible for the people, the processes, and the systems that ultimately deliver great services experiences for your customers. Call it RevOps, Sales Ops, Professional Services Ops, Delivery, Finance, or just Professional Services. These groups are responsible to ensure that their org's operations from sales, scoping, delivery, analysis, and strategy are building a healthy and profitable business. So this podcast is going to explore the people, processes, and technology aspects of services ops. Whether you are part of an independent PSO inside an organization, a consulting firm, agency, or anything in between, you will find the topics we address speak to the unique challenges you face every single day. We're going to tackle everything from technology strategies, departmental alignment, data orchestration, and more. Our goal is to help you advance past the traditional status quo and transform into proactive business leaders who are turning their internal processes into a strategic advantage. So this podcast is for this audience. This podcast is for these challenges. Very excited for this. Mahesh, anything you want to add?
This is great. And like you said, this is an audience that exists today, but not well defined and definitely not mature, right? And also, unlike a sales community, a pre-sales community, and a sales ops community, this community that we are talking about, which deals with the services quoting, or how do you put the services deals together, I think cuts across the board. So we'll talk more about that, but this is definitely an audience that cuts across the board, but also made up of an extremely important function for the organizations to grow and transform their businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do a quick little background on us, right? This is our first episode. I'll go ahead and start. In my career, I have been a marketing and sales operations leader, and I think it's absolutely fascinating, right? The concept of marrying business strategy with the people you have, with the technology you have, with the individual needs you have for your customers, and making it all work. It's wildly complex and very fun. It's very challenging. So it's always caught my interest, so much so that I wanted to join a company like Provus. And something that I love about operations, and something that I always want people to think about when it comes to operations, is it is not a department's responsibility, right? It is everybody's role to make sure that a business is running smoothly and it is running healthy. And so everybody has a responsibility to operations, even if it's not in your title. Go ahead, Mahesh. How about yourself?
Yeah, that's great, Chris. So my name is Mahesh Bakshi, co-founder and CEO here at Provus. Close to 30 years in the industry. 23 of that 30 I've spent in quote to cash domain. Started that journey back in 2001 with a contract lifecycle management company. Then worked for pricing optimization company. And then I was the first employee of a company called Aptus, which was a category defining quote to cash company, and amazing journeys from there on. But quote to cash is a very broad kind of defined domain, and it touches everything between your CRM and your ERP. or in other words, it could be called as mid office, right? Because the CRM is your front office, ERP is your back office, and then there's this mid office. Extremely complex processes that includes your, how do you put your CPQ, which is your configure, price, and quote together? How do you do the contracting, invoicing, billing, subscription-based, utilization-based, usage-based products, all of that kind of stuff. So very complex processes that gets automated as part of the quote to cash. Now, I was running customer success and professional services, for good amount of time in my career for a variety of different companies. And, especially in the quote to cash domain, automating quote to cash for our customers, which were largely product-based companies, I was running my entire business on Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, and email approvals, right? And that led to a lot of thinking in terms of, hey, the product CPQ is a completely different beast, and we were barely scratching the surface of the complexities that we were seeing with the enterprises. But here we were, you apply a lot of those similar kind of components or similar logic to the services business, and yet there were foundational differences in terms of how product CPQ would work versus how the services quoting would work. And that led us to start, the Provus journey. Not just me, my co-founder comes from a, services background, and, I'm super thankful that the entire team that we have at Provus includes really thought leaders in their space when it comes to product, engineering, customer success, but all of them come from a very deep, quote to cash background. And so here we are, I think, 3-year-old company, amazing journey. We'll talk more about that, but we are here to transform how quote to cash works for services business. That's what we do at Provus.
Yeah, I love that. And want to call out something really, really, really relevant. And once again, why this podcast is here. And what you mentioned is fundamental differences between product and services, right? There is call it a plethora of content out there for product-based operations folks, right? Just so that they can align their sales and marketing and then align, like I said, their quote to cash journey with these product-based journeys. And that's great and it's wonderful, but we want to make sure we serve the services audience, right? Extreme variables in what the product or the services you're delivering has to be tightly aligned all the way up to the very, very front. If you don't, there's not really getting around what you're promising customers in the beginning of their journey with you to how they're delivering. It has to be tight and aligned, and the people and process technology have to be aligned. And there are just fundamental differences between a product motion and a services motion. So we want to help out here. Like we want to provide there's some really solid recommendations and solid insights, and talk about challenges, right? And I think there are some very common challenges that services organizations are facing today, right? 2024, that I think they've been common challenges for a very long time. And maybe they're rearing their ugly head a little bit more vibrantly today. But let's pick some out, Mesh. Let's give some examples of challenges we'll talk about in this podcast.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot, and I'm going to stick to some of the most prominent ones. How many leaders would raise their hand if I say that, hey, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, you didn't sit there and felt like, maybe there was a way to maximize the revenue in the deals that I just closed. How many leaders are sitting there and thinking, I was able to close these deals, but I wish there was a way, or I'm sure there was a way that I could have gotten 2 or 3% more margin on my deal, right? And so now we are talking about, hey, I'm sitting here, I'm happy with the deals that I've closed, but then, maybe there was a way that I could have maximized my revenue. Maybe there was a way that I could have, optimized my margins. And I'm just, kind of touching the surface of the challenges. I mean, there are so many other challenges that exists. But let me kind of stay to those two. But why do leaders feel that, I wish I could have maximized my revenue and optimized my margin? I worked for a lot of different companies. A lot of them were, very fast growing companies where at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, we rush to close like, 30, 40, 50, 60 deals. And when you are rushing to do something like that in a quarter, there's a tremendous pressure on leaders across the board, whether it's a sales leader, pre-sales leader, services leader, or an ops leader, right? There is a tremendous pressure across the board to improve the cycle time, right? And in the process of improving cycle time, you might be selling your product or your hardware or your software subscription, which is somewhat automated or somewhat kind of, there is a method to the madness. But when it comes to services, there is no relation to, you selling $1 million software subscription to $500,000 services. You still have to go through some sort of process to say, hey, which modules are you buying? What are you trying to implement? What does the scope look like? Where are you going to use the resources from? What's going to be your resource mix? What kind of negotiation can you do? How is your project going to be laid out? What's the ramp up, ramp down? If it's a multi-year kind of a deal, then, what are the levers that you have? And most importantly, when you are rushing through those kinds of deals, you are thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had sold support services and education services and managed services along as well, right? And so a lot of this is mostly afterthought, many of the it's a tribal knowledge. So some people in your organization knows how to combine all of these services and structure the services in the correct way, but mostly it's a chaos because 96% of the prospects and customers that we talk to are on Excel spreadsheets. Now, Excel spreadsheet is great when it comes to getting something started. It can be a pet project, weekend pet project for someone, but it does not scale as your organization scale. And this is an experience that I personally have gone through in the growing organizations where not only there's a tremendous pressure to churn the services scores, but the next thing that happens after you close the deal in your kickoff, we talk about customer experience. I mean, nobody likes poor customer experience. We all strive towards getting the most amazing customer experience to our customers. But the first conversation you end up having is like, oh, well, what you are talking about in terms of scope is not included in the SOW. And from there on, the friction starts because you want to maximize your revenue. You don't want to lose money on services, and you don't have a whole lot of margin to play around. And at the same time, because you did not follow a very structured, organized process, now you are dealing with margin erosions very quickly. You are dealing with very bad customer experience, starting with change orders on your first week. And you are already thinking that, oh, any other services that I'm about to sell or I could have sold is just out of the question for next, X amount of time, because now I have to turn around the customer, make sure that they're happy, and we are well on our path to get this implementation live, right? And so that's a cycle that most leaders get stuck in. Unless you are really transformational in your thinking, unless you are visionary, unless you know how to organize and acquire your services coding data. And that's a challenge that we see across the board, Chris.
Yeah. And I think a couple signs, right? A couple signs that you just mentioned. One very tactical. Think about how many services engagements start with a change order. Probably a really good sign if you have an unacceptable amount of those, that there's something wrong with your people's processes and technology that leads you to that point. And then that little what if, right? The fear, almost the fear of missing out, but transferring it to your revenue and your margins. If things are going well, but still it's like, did I do well enough? Did we do it right? Did we get enough in there? I still question this, I question that. That's a really good sign that you've got opportunity internally to examine your people's process and technology, and think about how confident you are. That level of confidence. Are you 90% confident? Maybe things are going well. Are you 80%, 79? Like, let's not pretend like a percent here or there is a major difference in a services organization, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And to extend to that, right? I mean, when we talk about people, process, technology, let's talk about people part of it. When we talk about services operations, Chris,
Mhm.
this is one of those areas where doesn't mean that you have to have operations title in your job profile, doesn't mean that you have to have services in your job profile. this
Mhm.
is this is a evolving space. This is one where it cuts across different titles. I mean, you could be a delivery manager, but you are responsible to put the services codes together. You could be a pre-sales engineer and you are responsible for putting the services code together. You could be a deal desk a person, and you are responsible for putting the services code together, because that's how the industry and the maturity levels are at. And so when this is cutting across the titles, departments, people, obviously the people forms the most important aspect, which is how do you work across the board to get the most optimal outcome, which is a proposal that customer can buy into, but a proposal that you think you have included all kinds of services to maximize your revenue, and you have been able to optimize your margins by providing the best the kind of combination of scope and resource and locations, and the ramp up, ramp down, and so many other things that goes into delivering that services, right? And so that's the people part. And so no matter who you are, what your title is, if you are involved in selling services, you are part of this community, right? We want to build this community which is very inspirational in terms of what they're able to achieve in the shortest amount of time, especially in the sales cycle. We are inspired by this community who is like churning out a services quotes with a very minimal information, and yet try to justify what has been sold. Right. And so there is a lot of that people aspect, a lot of the inspiration, a lot of leaders out there, and it's cutting across the board, right? So that's the people part. Then the process part, something that I touched on earlier, it's a broken process to a great extent, because um, services is a complex affair, and it does require a lot of collaboration. It does require a very well thought through way of organizing and acquiring your data right from your prospect, who probably is ready to give you 1 or 2 or 3 hours, right? It's not like they're going to give you 1 week to say, okay, come and let's do a workshop and then you can give me a quote. Very rarely it happens. So you have 1, 2, or 3 hours to figure out exactly what the needs are, what the scope is, and all that kind of stuff. And then that process kind of goes through a lot of different internal people slash collaboration, because not one team, one person knows everything that has to go in there, right? You have to collaborate with different groups, different people, different leaders, and then figure out exactly what is the scope and how you're going to put your estimate and quote together, which is where the process comes in. The more you think of automating this process end to end, is how you are going to transform the business, for the organizations that you are working with, right? This is like I said before, we are in the business of enabling quote to cash for services, and this is one of those missing pieces of puzzle in automating your entire mid office, if you will, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, all right. So we give you a little introduction to the podcast. This is what we're about. You are what we're about. Services is what we're about. Uh, each time we have an episode, we want to make sure we leave you with a takeaway, some kind of either homework assignment or a thought that you should take back to the organization. So building off of what Mahesh just said, I want to challenge everybody out there to look at your organizations and look at who across your organization is part of services operations, in title or not. What Mahesh just talked about, what we've been talking about. Think about who they are. Do you talk to them all the time? What do they care about? What are they in charge of? Map it out. Really think about it. And if you are responsible for parts of services operations, and you recognize that there's somebody in your organization that you don't know very well, or you don't know at all, reach out to them, start making that connection, because very soon you're going to be required to speak to them, because it's time to start optimizing your people processes and technology. All right, so that's your takeaway and challenge for this episode. Let's go ahead and just close this out, Mahesh.
Yeah, I think this is great, Chris, and we are addressing an audience and calling it services operations, but it's cutting across the board, irrespective of your title. But if you are involved in selling or delivering services, this touches you one way or the other, right? And so from my perspective, I think there are three key things. One is think about how you are acquiring and organizing the data. Is it enough that you are able to use all of your historical legacy data in terms of how you sold your deals, how you executed deals? Do you even have insights into that? Or you are still at a, hey, I don't even have a way to organize and acquire my data. And so that's like step number one. That's where your transformative journey starts, right? And so the step two is, now if the answer is no, I don't, and Excel spreadsheet is not a way to organize and acquiring data, right? Because it can only go that far, and you cannot use any of those data from a historical analysis perspective and all that. So, so number one is, ask yourself, are you acquiring and organizing the data in the most meaningful way? The second is it helping me transform my services business, and especially when it comes to customer experience, maximizing your revenue, optimizing your margins? Where are you, right? From a maturity standpoint, or even, from a business standpoint, because no matter what your title is, I think you are playing an extremely important role in the organization to help your organization transform this business. And third, be the courageous leader and be the visionary, right? Because this is one of those missing pieces of puzzle, as I mentioned earlier. So be courageous leader and step up and say, hey, this is an important business for our company to grow, for organizations to grow. Whatever I'm doing is so critical, but it's not organized enough, and be visionary to say that, hey, I'm going to take the first step in thinking about how do we transform how we do the services quoting. I think that's really, is the beginning of everything.
It's fantastic. That's great. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up episode number 1 of the Services Ops podcast. We're going to be releasing these every 2 weeks. So make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn and X, and have a great day being an operations leader.